Hello and welcome back to Needed Conversations. We're your hosts, Ryan and Viktoriya Cole. So glad you've joined us right in the middle of our Prosperous Marriage series. We're talking about all things money and marriage, and we have had some incredible conversations, isn't that right?
Yeah, we had deep conversations, lots to take note of and apply. So hopefully you've been tuning in, and if you haven't, be sure to subscribe. That way, every time a new episode comes out, you are notified. But before we jump into the meat of this episode, I would like to implore you guys to become partners with us. Our ministry is called Empowered Culture Ministries, and we are creating a lot of content for marriage, and we believe in family. That's the biggest thing that we really are focusing on, but more so, we're also helping people and individuals discover their purpose. We're helping people to date God's way and also have marriages that reflect the glory of God. And that is so important in today's world where so many people are so confused about who they are and what they should do and what they need to accomplish and how they can accomplish by having this partnership, which is God designed. And so we're hoping you're getting a lot of good content from us, but I know that we're not able to do this ourselves. This definitely is taking a village to do. We have some incredible partners already, but if you are not a partner yet, we would love for you guys to partner with us for any amount. It could be as little as $5, $10, $50, and maybe you're blessed and would like to partner with us for a larger amount. We would appreciate anything and everything, as we have a grand vision of having a retreat center where we can host many workshops and keep a lot of this money in-house because we have been hosting some of the events outside because we don't have a location. So we would love to keep a lot of the things here and utilize it and open the facility up for other things and help people grow spiritually. That's what we're really about. So be sure to partner with us by going to moremostforever.com and becoming a monthly partner. We would love to see you guys be a part of what God is doing through this ministry.
That's right. And before we go into our first segment today, we are officially 10 years married.
Woohoo!
That is so exciting. We had such a fantastic time this past week, and some of you probably saw our pictures that we took, and we're just so excited to step into this next decade of marriage and all that is ahead of us. When we look back over our relationship, there's been a lot of highs and a lot of lows and everything in between. And it's been God's grace and mercy that has carried us through every season. And one of the best things I'm grateful for is the fact that we've been able to help so many other couples along the way. And really, it was only maybe a year or two after we got married that it all really started. You know, couples started asking us a lot of questions. We started bringing couples who were dating into our home, many of which are still in our lives today.
Oh, yes.
And God gave us supernatural wisdom, even when we were walking through it ourselves. And no matter if you've been married for 10 years or 50 years, there's always room for growth. And that's what we've learned. And that's why we love this first segment, because we're able to take part of our wisdom and then part of the wisdom we've gained from other people to give you marriage strategies. So this is our marriage strategy of the week.
So I did a poll on our Instagram page, and you can follow us at Moremost Forever on Instagram for a lot of other great tips. But I did a poll about what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in your marriage now. And I put on, I said money, parenting, sex, and then communication. And everybody seemed to jump on the communication right away. So,
Right.
And we're actually writing a book on communication. So we're excited that, we're going to be able to give you guys a resource that's going to help you with that aspect. But I was thinking about this strategy of the week, and I thought that this would be very helpful because this is something that we tell a lot of couples that we counsel. So one tip that you can apply when communicating with your spouse is in conversation, listening to understand and not listening to respond. So that will be your strategy of the week. Because oftentimes when we are in conversation, we are quick to process the information that we hear so that we can put up a defensive front and respond in the most defensive way possible, instead of, stepping back and saying, what is this person saying? And in the case of being married, You have to get to a place where you start understanding your spouse's perspective, because they did grow up from a different background. Their upbringing may be different. Even their vocabulary, just like for me, is different than for Ryan, because he grew up here in this culture. I grew up in a Ukrainian culture, so even some of the words that may seem like, okay, the definition is the same, but oftentimes we may perceive words a little bit differently. And even life. So it's very important to start kind of putting yourself in your spouse's shoes, instead of like right away, okay, what are they saying and how can I throw the best jab at them? You know what I'm saying?
Or how can I one up them? Or how can I win the argument? Oftentimes we've said, what is winning if you haven't won the heart of your spouse? You might have won that argument and you might be quote unquote right about whatever you're disagreeing about, but have you really won if you have pushed your spouse away in the process? And I think one of the greatest tools that we can have as individuals is self-awareness. Most people don't have self-awareness, and it takes a lot of intentional effort to stop in the middle of, a conversation, pause, and look at yourself from the outside in. Yeah. As if you're like a fly on the wall, listening into the conversation. What would it sound like if you were listening to someone else's conversation that looked just like yours? Would you be pleased with the way that you responded to your spouse? And so, like Viktoriya said, if you're self-aware enough, you'll be able to understand, okay, in this moment, I'm responding in a defensive way, in fighting against my spouse, for whatever reason, when I should be listening to understand. Do I truly understand what they're telling me? Or am I just sitting here formulating a response to defend myself, to protect myself? Am I pulling from a context that has nothing to do with this marriage? Am I pulling from a past relationship, in the way that I was raised, how my father treated me, how my mother treated me? And am I projecting onto my spouse because of that experience? Being self-aware is going to help you communicate more effectively with your spouse, but also to be able to show the love of Christ to them. Even when you don't agree.
Yeah.
To be able to say, I may not agree, but at least I understand. Well, that's one step closer to agreement. And at the end of the day, you may not agree on all of the nuances of a particular subject, but the ultimate goal is to agree about the path forward. And in your conversation with one another, the first step towards that is learning how to listen to understand and not listening to respond.
That's right. And I just wanted to finish this strategy of the week with this. Oftentimes people would ask, well, I don't understand. So how do I begin to learn how to understand when somebody's giving me a conversation? Like, how do I proceed with that type of communication? We often talk about wrestling with ideas. And one of the tips that we presented a few weeks ago was echoing, where we say, so I'm hearing you say this and this and this, and then giving them a chance to respond to you and say, no, that's not what I'm saying. So I feel like that strategy also would help you to start kind of understanding a little bit more, but also help your spouse to be able to express themselves and say, hey, you're not hearing what I'm saying,
You can pair these strategies that we're giving you, and you can build upon them. Also, if you're seeking to understand, think of it like, a science equation or a math problem, especially for the men out there. Ask questions, and not in an accusatory way, but really a genuine pursuit of knowledge. Like, how did my spouse get to this conclusion, right? And ask the questions that you wouldn't think to ask, right? And maybe you need to step away if the conversation gets too heated in order to come up with the right questions. So that's our marriage strategy of the week.
Yeah, we hope you apply it and give us some feedback, how it's working for you guys.
That's right. Well, let's talk about money and marriage, Viktoriya.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of topics, and if you haven't listened to the past episodes, we would encourage you to do so. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening, whether this be YouTube or Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you're listening, and give us a review. That would help a lot. But today we're going to be continuing to build upon the topics that we've discussed before about prosperity. We've talked about tithe and offering and seed. And today we want to kind of give you an inside look as to what the Lord has really shown us about the future of the church and how an economy works on a global scale, but also where the Lord is taking us in building what I've termed microeconomies.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, all eyes are on the world as we are in global conflict, wars. All of these things are symptoms of other underlying agendas that are going on. And if you look at the end times eschatology of the book of Revelations and you start extracting out some of these ideas and you start paying attention to the signs around you, you will understand that the main goal of a lot of these world leaders is to formulate some sort of one world economy.
Mm-hmm.
We see this in the transition from, fiat money or physical tangible dollars or dollars that are backed by gold currency into cryptocurrency and digital dollars and that sort of thing. And we have to pay attention to this because the more these world powers become aligned, the closer we are getting to the return of Christ, but also the more intense the persecution is going to come upon the average believer
Mm-hmm.
to the degree that there may be times when we are locked out of certain economic systems. And so I believe that it's the church's role right now to return back to the Acts chapter 2 model of what the church was originally founded upon, which was being a living, breathing example of the kingdom of heaven here on earth. That means forming cities within cities. If you look at Acts chapter 2, when they came out of the upper room and the gospel was preached in every language, in that very instant, 5,000 people were added to the church. And there
Wow.
were numerous other instances just like that. In a short period of time, their church grew rapidly. And the Bible said they gave all of their resources. They weren't arguing over 10% because they were giving everything. And there was this brain share, there was this resource share among all of them. So much so that the Bible says there was not one need among any of them. There
Wow.
was no raising the hand, say, I'm praying for my, water bill, or I'm praying to, for food to eat, or I'm praying. There was none of that because there was just such this collective spirit among the New Testament church. And I believe that God is bringing us back to that place. We're reblazing these ancient trails that have grown over because we have made the church experience into something that it was never intended to be. By and large, many church experiences are performance oriented
Mm-hmm.
and they cater to evangelism only when the Bible tells us to go into the world and preach the gospel. That's our place of evangelism. And if that's the case, then what is the original purpose of the church? Well, it is to be a reflection of the kingdom of heaven here on earth to the kingdom of darkness. That's what Ephesians 3:10-11 says. We're the educational system of the kingdom of heaven. We are to operate in the world, but not be of it. And so, as we bring this into the conversation of finances, what we see is a new church emerging, a church that is not focused on personality driven ministries, a church that is not focused on the performance aspect of ministry. It's more so about a community that emerges from discipleship. That should be at the heart of everything that we do. And with that, I believe God is going to bring us back to the place where there is this network created among believers, and we are able to share our resources in a new way, given that we live in a time where there's technology, there's all sorts of resources at our disposal that were not in those biblical times. But in our own way, we're going to form this brain share, and we're going to bring our gifts and abilities together and truly see the scripture come to pass where it says, every joint supplies.
Hmm. Yeah, it's powerful when we come together and we share our gifts. And I love even now, you can see in the world, God is using like the most uncommon people to bring the gospel. A lot of times we have created these religious structures, the church. And I'm not saying that they haven't been effective in discipling a lot of people, and a lot of people have, not found Christ through that. But I've also been seeing, the scripture talk about that he will pour out his spirit on all flesh. Your
Mm,
young men and women will prophesy. And you're seeing people go out in the streets and speak and prophesy and people receiving deliverance. I think we had this misconception in our mind that we have to go to church in order for presence of God to show up. But we're
mm.
really seeing that manifest out in the streets, out on jobs, and people ministering on subways, going to like the most remote places of the world and preaching the gospel. And that's what God was saying at the end times is what's going to happen. And so we believe that the gifts God has placed on the inside of each one of us, and we have something to bring to the table. And that doesn't mean that, somebody sits at the top and dictates what's going on.
Right.
I think that there has to be leadership, but I think there has to be a place where everybody's gifts are able to be used, just like when you see the 12 tribes, there's some that
Yeah.
served in the temple that were specifically dedicated for the service of the Lord. There's some that were really good at financing and was it Issachar?
They were educators.
The
Yeah.
educators. And so they're
Zebulon was
yeah,
entrepreneurs.
they
Such a good
all had
example.
such different distinct roles, but they all were brothers. They were all under, one father, one roof, so to speak, and they all kind of worked collectively. So that's what we believe is that, every individual should be empowered to express their gift, not for themselves, but to express their gift to witness to other people and bring people inside to be educated so that they can too be disciples of Jesus Christ, but also go out into the world and start preaching about the kingdom as well.
Mm.
So I think it's very important for us to focus on that versus let's just, you know, be in these performance venues and show up once a week and then we're busy grinding and focusing on this prosperity that the world offers,
Right. We're
chasing the
in the Babylonian system
yeah.
every other day of the week, and then we show up to this building one day a week, and we expect there to be some miraculous connection to the people that we say we're a part of a family with. But we've got to turn the leadership structure as we know it on its head for us to truly get back to Acts chapter 2. It's not about these personalities at the top of a pyramid. In many ways, the church can look like a pyramid scheme, right?
Yeah.
And it's certainly a network, and it's a network of people who share the same values and messages. So we are like that, those multi-level marketing deals in certain ways. But the Bible says that the apostles and the prophets are the foundation of the church. That fivefold ministry is laying their lives down as the brick and the mortar at the
Mhm.
foundation of the church, with people layered on top, all of these gifts being pushed upwards. We are to be the ones who are providing sturdy shoulders for the next generation to stand upon. And that's what the church really looks like. And I understand the need for social media, and we all have unique personalities, and we are called to reach different people. I'm not also against, the worship that the performance aspect of church in general. I believe that we should have the best of creative arts and all of that. Cinematography, let's even branch out further. I love what some of these film studios, Christian film studios, are doing. But at the end of the day, I think that if church begins and ends with that Sunday morning experience within the four walls of that church, and there isn't any deeper evaluation of the gifts that lay among us, then we are going to lose out in the end times from being able to push back against the kingdom of darkness. The fact of the matter is, when you come to church, there's really a very thin margin of gifts that are utilized.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we're looking for people to fill these performance based roles. Often, if you're creative, you can run a camera, that sort of thing. Your gift is brought to the forefront. If you can communicate well, your gift is brought to the forefront. But what about all of those that have different gifts? They might not be called to stand in a pulpit with a
Hmm.
microphone or to do what a worship leader does or what a cameraman does. And certainly all of these roles are necessary, but I think that we're overlooking the gifts that are sitting in our pews that could be utilized in such a profound way to expand our influence across our cities. Who are the lawyers and the teachers, the educators, the health practitioners, those who have all of these specialized gifts that are sitting dormant in our congregation, and the world recognizes them, the world is using them, but we have not tapped into their potential. And so that's why we're having this conversation today. As the world expands and forms a more unified global economy, that is not necessarily going to be for our individual benefit. And especially if you're a person of faith, if you do not cooperate with the values or the ideals that the world is presenting, you could very well be locked out of economic places of access. And so we have to, and I believe that this is going to happen inherently, we have to form micro economies. What does that look like? That means we've got to get to the place where we have unity in the body of Christ, where we have relationship and build networks in our churches to where we know who is laboring among us. And we're able to share our gifts with one another. We're able to circulate the dollar within our community many, many times before it exits out. We're able to build, and we're able to grow our own food, and we're able to provide for these everyday necessities without having to reach outside of ourselves. We don't have to go to a foreign country. We don't have to ship it in from China. We don't have to wait around on somebody to stock it on the shelves of our grocery store. We look inward instead of reaching outward. And that's really what the core of our message is today, is that if you want to tap into your greatest economic potential, you have to start looking inward and not outward.
Hmm.
Most people are in this rat race in pursuing prosperity as it is dictated by the world. And most of the time, they're competing based on faulty standards, and we end up producing carbon copies of one another. And, everybody sees something that works, and we all chase after that instead of being authentically and uniquely who God created us to be and allowing those gifts to spring forth. That's what's going to bring the most economic breakthrough in your life, is when you stop reaching outward, stop comparing yourself with others, and discover what part it is you play in the unfolding of God's plan for humanity, what part of the body that you are. That's when you're going to tap into the greatest levels of economic breakthrough. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that's so good. A few weeks ago we talked about purpose and how your purpose attracts the resources that you need to fulfill that purpose. God gives you everything that you need to fulfill your purpose, and you have to tap into, like Ryan said, being authentically you. And what does that mean? Meaning that you are before God, and God gives you the strategies of the people that I'm going to reach. The problem that I'm going to solve,
Yes.
and where I'm going to do it. Where does God want me to plant? The people that He wants me to be connected with. And ultimately, the goal is to pass the baton. That's what God calls us to do. Is the Great Commission is to make disciples of all men. We can't do it if we're constantly looking at the world and chasing the finish line, which constantly changes. And it's frustrating for yourself. That every time that you see, you're like, oh, I feel like I've accomplished this by this age, but now it's a new trend. I got to do something. And then
Right.
you constantly are chasing that versus there's fulfillment in your heart because you're actually doing what God told you to do and there's fulfillment there. And so I think it's powerful what we're talking about in regards to making sure that you are in the will of God. You're submitted to the purpose and the will of God, and those resources will come and attract. And like Ryan said, oftentimes we're looking to attain what's external when really it's inside. If you sit down and if you write down, like, what is the network of people around me? What are some of the things that I have right now? What are some of the things that I can cut back? You can come up with some really good things. You can be pretty creative if you
What have
sit
we
down and start
overlooked?
strategize. Yeah, we've
Yeah.
had to do that ourselves. And one of the things that I really love about, our marriage is that we've planned every single year around our anniversary, and we've been strategizing these past few days, and we've been writing what God has really been giving us, this big vision, and how we can, like, take it with bite-sized pieces. And that requires you to sit down and chisel out your schedule and say, what are some of the things that we've been doing that has been taking away from this time so
Mm.
that we're more effective? What else can we do? Who else can we reach out to? Who else can we connect to in order for this vision to come to pass? And so we're strategizing, and we know that a person that, has that plan in place, and we have faith, we believe God, everything else is going to be up to God. We're going to do what we can, and we're going to believe and put our hope in God, and he's going to bring that to pass if we trust him. And but we also plan, because
Yes.
faith without works is dead. So we also have to put action behind what we feel like God is putting in our hearts to fulfill during this time and during the season.
I think that there is a clear difference between dreaming and strategizing.
Yeah.
And I think that the dreaming part is easy to me. You just get undistracted. I mean, you can dream of endless things, but most people never get to the development phase, or they never start designing it, and they never start assessing what resources it's going to take and what resources they already have at their disposal. Most people dream and they wait around on something to fall out of the sky, and they think that dreaming is enough when it's not. You have to strategize, and then you have to allow the Holy Spirit to open your eyes to see what
Mhm.
resources are already in front of you. And maybe that's the questions you have to ask God. What have I overlooked that is sitting right in front of me, that's staring me right in the face?
Yeah.
It could be relationships that you've overlooked, people that you've undervalued. Maybe you've even undervalued yourself. The biggest form of equity that a person brings into entrepreneurship before anything else is sweat equity. You might not have any money in the bank, but you certainly have your own strength. You have your gifts, your talents. What can you begin to monetize right now? Let's take it to the Bible, right? Anytime you see this great man or woman of God be used to do extraordinary things, you oftentimes see God asking them a
What do they
unique
have?
question.
Yeah.
What do you have?
Mhm.
Who's in your network? And for those like Moses or David, he asked the question, what's in your hand? Again, this is going back to learning how to reach inward and not externally. If
Mhm.
you look at the example of Moses, right? He God brought him out of Egypt. He is in the wilderness. He's, with this tribe that he's found, and Jethro, and he saw his wife Zephora, and now he's off and he's in a cave, and he has this experience from God, and God shows him the plight of the people in Egypt, the Israelites who are being gravely abused. They're enslaved, and God's wanting to set them free, and he's looking to Moses and says, I'm going to use you. And Moses is looking at himself and it says, who, me? A man with a stutter? A man who fled because, I had murdered a man? A flawed individual? You want to use me? I'm out here in the wilderness. What do I have to bring to the table? And God
Mm.
says, what do you have in your hand? He
Mhm.
says, it's a staff. He says, throw it down. The staff becomes a serpent. And how many times was a simple stick used to bring about a miraculous outcome? whether it be to reveal the power of God to Pharaoh, or whether it was to part the Red Sea, or to strike a rock and see water come forth, whether it was to lead a nation through the wilderness and towards the promised land. This seemingly insignificant object God used in supernatural ways. The same thing is true about David, right?
I love the story of David because he practiced with a sling and a stone, while he was shepherding the sheep. But he went and saw his brothers and took food to them, and he saw this giant, Goliath, blaspheming the name of God, and he was like, "Who is this? I'm going to go fight him." And he was little. He was young.
Yeah.
And he was like, "How are you gonna go and fight him?" So they tried even to put armor on him, which I love that part that God, included that in the Bible about somebody trying to put armor on you when
Yeah,
they
Saul
see.
said, "Hey, if you want to do it, here's my armor."
Yeah, and the thing is that you won't be able to wear somebody else's equipment because that whatever they used for their life and for their purpose, it may have worked for them, and they may not understand why you're using whatever you're using.
Unconventional
It's
tools.
unconventional tools because, like, who goes into the warfare with a sling and a stone? I remember we had this story and we were driving in the car and we talked about, what did you guys learn in Sunday school? And they talked about how, David killed Goliath with a stone. And Mila goes, I don't know how he did that. And I was like, it's baffling. It was only God that he put so much power against it. Or maybe David had so much practice. And of course, God was behind it and
I think it was a
completely.
combination of the both. It was
Yeah.
God's power met David's practice.
Yeah, and it's so incredible that he didn't have to have, the armor that a typical soldier would wear. God gave him specific tools to use because that was his purpose. That was something that God called him to fulfill. And it's going to baffle people that are around you. Why would you do it that way? Why would you use that? How is this even going to work? And you are going to look crazy, but be affirmed in what God has called you to do. He's going to bring the right people, the right connections, and the right resources to be able to fulfill that purpose. So,
See, most people, I think, me included, we have this perfection problem, right?
yeah.
We want everything to be perfect before we start. And I get that there's certain strength behind that. I know my own personality and I want things to be right, certainly. But if we're waiting around for things to be perfect, we're never going to do what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
I think more than perfect is to be obedient, to be
Mhm.
present, to be active, to start now, right? If you've got your youth, that is a gift. You got physical strength, you've got your two legs, that is a gift. You've got a network of friends. Do you know what your friends do for a living? Do you know what their skills are? How can you leverage those skills and trade with one another to be able to help each other fulfill the purpose that God has? We live in a society that is so individualistic. And I
Mhm.
and I see the reason for that, especially in the United States of America. But we're better together. We're better when we can join our collective gifts together in order to accomplish something profound. I think that that's kind of the keys that we want you to walk away with today are these three things, is that if you're looking to grow financially, if you're looking to fulfill a purpose, what is the first steps that's going to take you there, right? It's realizing that you have to reach inward and not outward.
Mhm.
You have to stop comparing yourself to others. You have to start looking at what is already in your purview to be able to utilize. That means you have to, number one, assess your gifts. What are your strengths? What are your talents? Is your personality built a certain way, right? And then from there, what are your current resources? Which I think is, leaning back to that conversation about the future of the church. I think that this speaks to a lot of millennials right now. Many millennials are simplifying. We're learning that we are happier with less, that we can do more with less, is that we don't need all of the bells and whistles to experience God. We don't need an LED wall to experience God. Sure, it's nice, it's aesthetic, whatever, but we don't need it. I've experienced God in a living room in a more powerful way than I have at times sitting in a huge, humongous, beautiful building with all of the bells and whistles. And so even with your own personal life, millennials are realizing that harvesting your own food can be more valuable than sitting at a restaurant, or scaling down the size of your house and spending more time with your family instead of working your behind off to pay for a mortgage on a house that you're never at because you're always working, or you're
Mm.
not enjoying because you're slaving away in the system of the world. It's realizing what resources you have that you have underutilized, even down to the simple fact of how much we waste food in our refrigerators.
Mhm.
I think people go to the grocery store with great intentions. They fill their fridge and then they go and eat out, and they come home and they look and the lettuce and the broccoli have wilted and they throw it away and they repeat the cycle. It's like, just be honest with yourself. Look at your schedule. If you're going to eat out, don't buy. But let's be honest, even to a greater degree, do we really need to eat out as much as we do? Can we not grow some of our food? There's no excuse. You can trade. There's some people that we know who rent land to farm on,
Mhm.
and they farm full time and sell the produce, and they're using somebody else's land to do it. And I'm sure they want their own land, but they're taking a creative pathway to get there. And even Victoria, she's really good at this. She can speak to this more than me. We have our own little let us grow here right in the house.
Yeah. You don't have to be a farmer. You don't have to grow your own food. But like Ryan was saying, there's a network of people. That's their gifting. And that's something
Yes,
that they really enjoy. And the way, especially with microeconomies, and this is something that you can take and apply right now, is to grow your communities and to help and support your communities. You want to circulate the money instead of giving it outwards to these big box stores. Why don't you give it to a farm? Like,
right.
go and buy produce locally, because when you put a demand on a farm to you constantly are buying every single week, they're going to produce more. And so that means when the world shuts down, just like we've seen at during COVID in 2020, people were, freaking out that their favorite sauce was gone in the store or the shelves were empty. But honestly, like, if we put the demand on the farms here locally we constantly are buying groceries from here and we're utilizing them, not only are you healthier because it's grown here, there's no spraying of pesticides. It doesn't have to be delivered for weeks at a time. It doesn't sit on your table for 3 weeks and not rot because let's face it, this is food. If you don't use it, it's supposed to mold. But a lot of places where you go to the store, like the produce that you buy, it actually does not mold because of the stuff that they put on them. So, in a sense, yes, it's convenient, but we're also hurting ourselves because it's fast, it's quick, it's convenient, but then we're also not feeding our bodies. And then we're also wondering, why do we have brain fog? Why do our kids behave the way they do? Because of the foods that we eat. I mean, you are what you eat, essentially.
It's highly
So,
processed.
yeah, although we in some sense progressed and there's so many advances out here, medically and food wise, all these things that we are extending our research on and acquiring. At the same time, we have more people that are depressed, suicidal, unhealthy, and so I think it's so important for us to like get back to the roots of actually growing our own food, cooking our own food, enjoying cooking together,
Eating
eating at the
seasonally.
table. Yeah, eating seasonally. We're not used to like, oh, we need to buy, a watermelon in the middle of winter, and it's like they don't grow in the winter. They grow in the summer. So just even learning those things, God created a seed to multiply. All of the seed that, you plant into the ground, and that's why I'm so fascinated with farming, is when you plant one little tiny seed, let's say of tomatoes or of, dill, like at the end of the season, a lot of these plants, they'll blossom like these flowers, and there'll be thousands of seeds just in that one plant that
Mhm.
you've planted. So there's multiplication in that. And I've been able to share. My mom has fruit trees and all these things that she grows in her house, and it's like every single year those fruits, they multiply because she cultivates them, she cuts them, cuts the bushes, and they continue to produce more and more and more. And that's how God created it to be. He created for it to multiply, not just like, genetically modified seed, which doesn't, multiply. They don't want you to save those seeds. They don't want you to grow your own food. So
Or
I've
seedless cucumbers,
seedless
seedless
cucumbers, seedless
watermelon.
watermelons. I mean, what do you have to do in order for you to manipulate, these vegetables and fruits in order for them to be like crossed
Mhm.
against one another? There's actually a scripture, I think, in Exodus or Genesis where it talks about God not wanting to mess with the genetics of a seed.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna go into all that, but I get passionate about it, and again, you don't have to be a farmer. You can support your local farms here that are passionate, people that are passionate in growing their food, and not only will, you support your local community, but your health will benefit, your children will benefit, and you'll be feeling more nourished as well.
Absolutely. I love this. And part of that is, like you said, if you're not gifted as a farmer, which I think everybody could learn to a certain degree, little
Yeah, it's
gardening things,
important. Yeah.
growing herbs is extraordinarily easy, right?
Yeah.
If you're not gifted in that area, you have to look within your community and say, who is gifted in this way? How can I support them? I'm sure that if you were to ask around, there would be people in your community who are farming or gardening, right?
Mhm.
And you could trade skills in some way. I know it sort of seems like going backwards, but at times I feel as if we've progressed in a loop and now we're like worse off than we were before, even though we have all of this technology. And going back to these simple things is what's really going to bring us back to joy again and back
Mm.
to fulfillment and significance in our lives again, which is this third point, right? So we've talked about assessing your gifts, assessing your current resources, identifying where you've been wasting, tightening that belt. But number three is assess your network. Let me tell you this, your net worth is directly connected to your net worth. Your net worth affects your net worth. Who is in your friend group that has gifts and skills that maybe you have overlooked or undervalued? It's important for you to recognize who's laboring among you. Going back to what we believe is emerging within the church is this returning to this Acts chapter 2 model so you can see who is laboring among me and how can we leverage these gifts and create sort of a microeconomy, a city within a city to be able to insulate ourselves from the challenges that are already coming upon us as a church, right? If we don't adhere to the world system, that we could be locked out of certain resources. Well, that's not going to be as big of a problem if we have already created our own network of resources among one another.
Mhm, and it's so good because we've talked about looking inward and not outward. It's the same aspect for your community. Looking inward, like what is around your community, the farmers that you have, the local artisans, and, your mechanics or whoever. And it's not to say that you're not going to pay them money. Maybe there's an exchange, maybe there will come a time where you will have to say, "Hey, I'm going to give you my milk for the eggs from your chickens," and I'm already seeing that. I feel like especially within my community, like the Slavic speaking people, like there's truckloads that are coming from California. They are delivering fruit and people go there and buy the box fruit that's seasonal. Let's say like the persimmons that are coming from California or cherries that are in season in the fall. So there's ways that you can, connect with people that will say, "Hey, you know what? You can go over here and get this and get it locally." And not only is it going to be healthier for you, but you're also keeping this money in house, and that money is going to stay in your community and going to continue to prosper the community because you're doing just that.
Right. One of the things we've been talking about is in looking at our vision that is so expansive for our ministry and even business endeavors. Like, it's going to be impossible for us to accomplish with just Victoria and
It's
I.
expansive and
It's
expensive.
expansive and
EN
expensive.
and AN.
Yes. And so that's why this year, as a part of our vision and strategy, we are building teams. right? We are looking for gifted people to network with, and we're also identifying the gifts that are already around us. Many people at our marriage event came up to us and said,
How
"Hey,
can we help?
if you would
Yeah.
have asked, I would have served in this way." But it's assessing those gifts that are among us and being able to partner and leverage. That's what's going to bring economic growth at a more rapid pace. I think you can accomplish great things by yourself, but you can accomplish even greater things and at a quicker pace by learning to network.
Hmm.
Pick up that phone, build authentic relationships, have deeper conversations. I was telling Victoria that there are so many people who are gifted, but may not have the gift of gab. They may not have social skills, and we have overlooked them. They're sitting in our midst. People who are not social at all, but are incredibly intelligent, are engineers. You say, I didn't know that they were engineers. I didn't
Right.
know that they were in this career path or that, or they had these skills. And we overlooked them because they weren't as talkative or friendly or
Hmm.
personable. That's why you've got to get out of your comfort zone and you've got to start making meaningful connections. What if the answer that you were looking for, the breakthrough that you were looking for, is right at arm's length? Somebody who you even have a phone number to that you've just undervalued. You need to start evaluating and praying and asking the Lord, bring the faces before me of those people who can be a resource to this dream that you have given me. Or who can I be a resource to?
I mean, look at Jesus. He connected with 12. There's masses
Yes.
that followed him, but 12 disciples that had all of these vast gifts. Some
Yes.
had stronger personalities than others, but for some reason, Jesus was attracted specifically to that group of people. And you don't need that many people. You just need your 12. You know how they say, your 12 that will also disciple the 12, and it will grow from there.
And it was sort of that idea of the church in Acts chapter 2 before it even existed. It's like within those 12, you had someone who was good with money, you had a fisherman, you had a builder, a tax collector, a doctor. You had all of these gifts that came together to make this 3-year ministry journey happen
Hmm.
with Jesus. And so, how is God calling you to connect to others? Well, I want to take the opportunity right now to ask you, does this vision that we've presented to you over and over again inspire you in some way? Would you like to connect and serve in some capacity? We need a lot of help when we're talking about building, developing land. If you have skills in agriculture, if you have construction skills, if you're creative, if you're good with social media, you're editor, you're however you want to connect with us, text us at 864 or DM us, reach out to us. We are accessible. We would love to connect with you so you can serve, you can be a part of this vision that God has given us. So don't be shy, reach out. We're connecting with people already in our network, but you can join our network. And in the process, I think being alongside of what we're doing is going to be an immense blessing to you as well. Your
Hmm.
marriage is going to be strengthened, your walk with God is going to be strengthened. So oftentimes we think that it requires money to have access, but it's just having the heart of a servant.
Yeah, for
I have
sure.
been privileged to be inside of rooms that I could have never paid to be a part of, sitting in rooms with influencers. I've been in rooms with diplomats and kings and queens and people who are, I've talked with billionaires. I've sat, with people who had more money and thought of money in realms in ways that people don't think about when you get to that level of access when it comes to resources. And other people would have spent six figures to sit in those rooms. And the reason why I had access to those rooms was because I was serving,
Hmm.
because I was utilizing my gifts. You never know what kind of rooms your gift will bring you into. And you may not have the money in the bank to give you access, but you certainly have you have it within you to be able to serve.
Hmm. That's right. Yeah, so this has been a really deep conversation. Hopefully, you took a lot of notes or tips, mental notes maybe. And once you log off, have a good conversation with your spouse on how you can move forward and build a network of people and
And
connect with
ask
people
yourself
locally.
those 3 questions.
Yeah,
What are your gifts? What are your current resources? And are you networked?
yeah, for sure.
But we're going into our final segment of the day, which is our
Question of the week. And I chose one that's pertaining to money. So this question says, how do we balance our finances if my spouse is a spender and I'm more of a saver?
wow. Well, there's a lot to unpack there because this is not an uncommon scenario. But really, I think every married couple, regardless if there's extremes in your spending habits, you have to come to an agreement
Yeah.
as to who's going to manage the finances first and foremost. My mom and dad had this dilemma. For many years, my mom managed the finances, and they didn't do that well. But my mom is extraordinarily gifted. For the majority of their marriage, she made more than my dad. She brought in more money. That wasn't a problem for them, and they now both do really well. But she wasn't as skilled organizationally to be able to manage their money. She needed to be out there making the money.
It's funny because her gifting is in sales and her husband's gifting is more
Operations,
operational.
yep.
And it's funny how it manifested more like towards the end of their life where actually their roles is just that.
On
and
their
that's
actual career path.
on yeah, and it's managing on the managing level, but it took them a while to get that to click in their marriage. Like, this is her gifting, this is his gifting, and this will be the best way for us to function as a family so that we're bringing in money, we're saving money, and we're building from there.
And once they did, their finances started to flourish. And if you're a spender, if you're not as good with money, let your spouse lead in that way and determine what your limits are. You have to have a conversation with one another and say, hey, if we're apart from each other, you're out and about or I am, and we are looking to spend above a certain dollar amount, we need to pick up that phone and call. It might feel childish or inconvenient or I don't feel free. Listen, you're one flesh. You've got to communicate at some point. And no matter where you land on the scales financially, whether you're mega millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, at some point you got to ask that question with the person that you're doing life with your spouse. And so for you, it might be $100 threshold. For others, it might be $1,000 threshold. Or for some of you, it might even be $20, right? As disciplined as you have to be. And if you can't get that straight, then maybe you should have 2 separate bank accounts. One that you manage your bills and your obligations and your investments out of, and another that you deposit money that is quote unquote disposable. I kind of hate that term, but it speaks to money that is left over after those investments and after those obligations that you have, the liabilities, that you're able to do things that are more fun. Go out to eat, do your nails, buy a present, go to Home Goods like Victoria did yesterday and
Call me out.
yeah, buy a strainer, right? But you got to be disciplined enough to say, no, this is our limit. This is how much we have to spend, and I'm not going to go beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of that is being very disciplined with your credit cards.
Mm-hmm.
Credit cards are not designed to be your friend if you are using those credit cards like disposable money. You're using credit cards to eat out. You're using credit cards
Gas,
for
groceries,
invaluable expenditures, right? Credit cards are only valuable if you know how to use them correctly, leveraging them for wealth, leveraging them for investment's sake. And you can use the points, credit cards give you points all day long, but you're going to fool yourself. And then you're going to look at the end and you're going to say, holy cow, we have thousands of dollars in credit card debt. To be a little transparent, Victoria and I got to that point. We had close to $30,000 in credit card debt, and we had to get disciplined, and God helped us and gave us a strategy
We literally cut
to
our
pay it all
cards.
off. We
Yep.
did cut our cards.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've learned how to use our cards, and we've been able to, the past several years, use those cards in order to invest and do other things. So we still have credit cards. We have big lines of credit, but we're not using those credit cards for disposable, spending habits.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I think that was a lot. Learn how to read your credit card statement too, by the way, know when the closing date is and so on. But I think that was enough for that question. What do
Yeah.
you say?
I mean, we could create a whole episode on that in itself, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that you got a lot out of this. And if you wanted to submit a question, you can text us at 864-428-7131, or you can also message us at Mormos Forever, and maybe we'll answer your questions on air. When we receive these messages through our texting line, this is us. Nobody else is filtering it. And if we ever say it on air, we're not going to put your name out there. So it is going to be anonymous. So if you want your questions answered, it could be any kind of questions. It does not have to be pertaining to money. Please message us, reach out to us, and we would love to connect and give you guys some of the answers that we may have.
Well, until next time, this has been Needed Conversations. Make sure you subscribed, and we'll catch you back next week.
We'll see you next time.